The fluorescent lights of Cross Dynamics' 47th floor had been dark for 3 hours when Alexander Cross's keycard beeped against the executive elevator panel. 2:47 a.m. glowed on his Patek Philippe as he stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. "The Shanghai team wants an answer by morning, Marcus. Tell them." A thin beam of light flickered from the supply closet near the east wing. Alexander froze. Security would have swept the building hours ago. His thumb hovered over the emergency contact as he approached the cracked door, designer shoes silent against polished marble. What he saw through that gap would unravel everything he thought he knew about intelligence, opportunity, and the woman who'd been invisible to him for 6 months. Zara Thompson sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by towers of organic chemistry textbooks. A small flashlight balanced precariously on a stack of toilet paper rolls, casting shadows across pages dense with molecular structures. Her cleaning cart blocked the doorway like a fortress wall. She was muttering under her breath, completely absorbed, "If the hydroxyl group attaches here instead of here." Her pen sketched rapid diagrams in notebook margins already crowded with calculations. Alexander's breath caught. Those weren't beginner texts. Advanced organic chemistry, biochemical pathways, clinical pharmacology, books that had tortured him through Harvard pre-med before he'd switched to business. But this woman, wasn't she the cleaner who emptied his trash every night? The floorboard creaked under his weight. Zara's head snapped up, eyes wide with the panic of someone caught stealing. In one fluid motion, she slammed the textbook shut and scrambled to her feet, grabbing for her cleaning supplies. I'm not stealing anything." Her voice carried a slight tremor, but her chin tilted up defiantly. "I was just borrowing the light. My apartment doesn't have good lighting for studying, and I know the building Wi-Fi password helps me access the medical journals, but I swear I'm not." "Stop." Alexander raised his hand, stepping fully into the cramped space. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with the musty scent of old books. "What were you working on?" Zara clutched the textbook against her chest like armor. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her features, dark circles under intelligent brown eyes, shoulders that carried more than cleaning equipment. "Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Cross." Her tone turned formal, distant. The same voice she used when she nodded politely in the hallways, when she became invisible again. But Alexander had seen what she was reading. Had seen her scribbled notes about enzyme inhibitors and cellular pathways. His biotech division had been struggling with those exact concepts for 8 months, burning through millions in research grants. "That formula you were writing," he pressed, nodding toward her notebook. "The enzyme cascade. Show me." "Sir, I really need to finish my rounds." "Show me the formula." Something in his voice, not the usual executive command, but genuine curiosity, made her pause. Slowly, reluctantly, she opened the notebook. The margins were filled with complex biochemical equations, drawn with the precision of someone who understood not just the mechanics, but the elegant logic underneath. In the corner of one page, she'd sketched a molecular structure that made Alexander's pulse quicken. His research team had been chasing that exact compound for months. "Where did you learn this?" The question came out sharper than he intended. Zara's jaw tightened. "Does it matter? I'm still just the woman who empties your trash." She started shoving books into her cleaning cart, but Alexander caught sight of a medical school application poking out from under her supplies. University of Chicago. Clinical rotations. Status, pending financial aid. Your pre-med. Was. AM. It's complicated. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Look, Mr. Cross, I know this looks bad. Using company space, company Wi-Fi. I can explain. How long have you been working on enzyme inhibitors?" The question clearly wasn't what she expected. She blinked, then answered automatically, since my biochemistry rotation 2 semesters ago. But I've been thinking about targeted cancer treatments since. She caught herself, lips pressing into a thin line. Alexander studied her face in the flashlight's glow. This woman, this brilliant woman, had been cleaning his office for 6 months while working on research his team couldn't crack. Have you ever discovered that the person you overlooked completely was exactly what you needed? What's your theory? He asked quietly. About the enzyme pathways. Zara hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Most cancer treatments attack cells indiscriminately. But what if we could target the specific metabolic pathways that cancer cells depend on? Create inhibitors that starve tumors while leaving healthy tissue alone. Alexander felt his world tilt. That's exactly what my biotech division has been trying to solve. I know. Zara's voice was barely a whisper. I've been reading your team's published research. They're close, but they're approaching it backwards. They're trying to build inhibitors that block pathways. Instead, you need to redirect them. She flipped to a clean page and started sketching rapidly. Look, if you introduce a competitive substrate here, the cancer cell's own enzymes will choose the path of least resistance. You're not fighting the cell's biology, you're tricking it into destroying itself. Alexander stared at the elegant diagram taking shape under her pen. It was brilliant. Impossibly, beautifully brilliant. How long have you been developing this? 2 years. Since my mother. Her voice cracked slightly. Since I watched her die from something that should have been treatable. The supply closet felt suddenly too small. Alexander found himself looking at Zara Thompson, really looking at her, for the first time. Not the invisible cleaner who nodded politely in hallways, but the woman who'd been hiding genius behind a mop bucket. Why haven't you published this research? Zara laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what credentials? What lab access? What funding? She gestured around the cramped closet. This is my research facility, Mr. Cross. Stolen hours between cleaning shifts, borrowed Wi-Fi, textbooks from the library. Alexander's phone buzzed, Marcus, still waiting for the Shanghai decision. But for the first time in months, maybe years, business felt secondary to something larger. What would you need? He asked. To continue this research properly? Suspicion flickered across Zara's features. Why would you care? Because the woman he'd been paying minimum wage to empty trash cans had just solved a problem worth billions. Because his research team of PhD scientists had missed what she'd figured out in a supply closet. But something in her defensive posture warned him against saying that. Because, he said instead, good ideas shouldn't have to hide in dark closets. Would you trust someone who'd never seen you before offering to change your entire life? Zara studied his face in the flashlight's glow, searching for the catch she knew had to be coming. In her experience, when powerful men noticed invisible women, it rarely ended well. I should go, she said finally, hefting her cart. My supervisor checks the security logs. If I'm behind schedule. Wait. Alexander stepped aside, but didn't let her pass. What if I told you there was another way? A way to do this research properly, with proper equipment, proper support? I'd say you don't understand how the world works, Mr. Cross. But her eyes lingered on the notebook in her hands, on 2 years of work that might never see daylight. Maybe I don't, he admitted. But I understand good research when I see it. The fluorescent hallway light flickered on, motion sensor activated by some late-night security patrol. In the harsh overhead glare, the supply closet looked shabby, desperate. Zara looked exhausted but defiant. Think about it, Alexander said as she pushed past him with her cart. What you've discovered here, it could change everything. But as he watched her disappear around the corner, wheels squeaking on polished marble, one question burned in his mind: why was the most brilliant person in his building hiding in a closet instead of leading his research team? And what did that say about everything he'd built? Subscribe before you miss what happens when he digs into her past. The truth will shock you. What would you do if you discovered someone's genius was hiding right under your nose? Comment below, guilty or not guilty. Should Alexander pursue this, or respect her privacy? Alexander Cross hadn't slept. 3 cups of coffee and 6 hours later, he sat in his office watching security footage on his laptop screen. There she was, Zara Thompson, badge number 247, entering the building at 10:15 p.m. every night for the past 6 months. But what she did after clocking in made his chest tighten with something between admiration and rage. The grainy footage showed her cleaning methodically through 5 floors, then disappearing into stairwells with books hidden under cleaning supplies. She'd emerge in different supply closets, different conference rooms, anywhere with decent lighting and Wi-Fi access. Jesus, he whispered, watching her study advanced pharmacology while mopping hallways at 3 a.m. His phone rang. Cross here. Sir. This is Marcus. About the Shanghai deal. Put it on hold. Alexander's eyes never left the screen. I need you to run a background check. Full employment history, education records, financial status. Zara Thompson, employee ID 247. The cleaning lady. Just do it. 2 hours later, Marcus knocked on Alexander's door carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd uncovered buried treasure. Sir, you need to see this. The first document made Alexander's breath catch. University of Chicago Medical School. Zara M. Thompson. GPA, 3.94. Class rank, 4 of 312. 4th in her class at one of the nation's top medical schools. Keep reading, Marcus said quietly. Academic awards filled 3 pages. Dean's list every semester. Research publications in biochemistry journals. A full scholarship that had covered tuition but not living expenses. Then came the employment history that made Alexander's stomach drop. Northwestern Memorial Hospital, research assistant, terminated. Reason, insubordinatio. Details. Miss Thompson challenged attending physician's diagnosis of acute appendicitis in pediatric patient. Patient's subsequent emergency surgery revealed Thompson was correct. Child had rare metabolic disorder that would have been fatal if treated as appendicitis. Thompson was terminated for overstepping professional boundaries, despite saving patient's life. Alexander set the folder down, hands shaking with fury he didn't expect. She was fired for being right. There's more. Marcus flipped to the next section. Financial records show she's been supporting her 8-year-old son while maintaining medical school enrollment. Malik Thompson, tested gifted, attending PS 118 in Bronzeville. The math hit Alexander like a physical blow. Zara cleaned 5 buildings between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., attended classes during the day, studied whenever she could steal moments, and somehow found time to raise a brilliant child alone. Medical school status? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. Clinical rotations postponed indefinitely. Outstanding balance, $47,000. She can't graduate without completing clinicals, can't afford clinicals without income, can't maintain income while doing unpaid rotations. A perfect trap. Designed to keep brilliant people exactly where the system wanted them. But Alexander wasn't finished digging. That night, he drove to Bronzeville. The apartment building squatted between a corner liquor store and a boarded-up laundromat. Graffiti covered most of the first floor, but someone had painted over the obscenities near the children's entrance. Careful, loving brushstrokes that screamed Zara's attention to detail. Through a first-floor window, he glimpsed her at a kitchen table with a boy who had her same intelligent eyes. Malik bent over homework while Zara highlighted passages in a medical text, both working by the light of a single lamp. Alexander's throat tightened. In his penthouse apartment, he had rooms he never entered. Here, a brilliant woman and her gifted son shared space that barely fit their dreams. Have you ever realized your abundance came from someone else's sacrifice? He was about to leave when movement in the building's community room caught his attention. Through grimy windows, he saw Zara with 5 other women, all wearing cleaning company uniforms. She was teaching them. Alexander crept closer, hearing fragments through the thin walls. Mortgage documents always have the interest rate here. If someone tries to charge you more than this percentage, walk away. Predatory lending targets our community specifically because. Financial literacy. She was teaching financial literacy to other cleaning women after working 16-hour days. Miss Zara, one woman asked, how you know all this? Because I almost lost everything before I learned to read the fine print. Zara's voice carried exhaustion but infinite patience. They count on us not knowing. Knowledge is the only power they can't take away. Alexander backed into shadows, feeling like a voyeur witnessing something sacred. This woman wasn't just surviving, she was lifting others while climbing herself. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, found something else. You need to see this. Back in his office an hour later, Alexander stared at medical journals spread across his conference table. Marcus had highlighted Zara's name in red on research papers published while she was still an undergraduate. She's been developing that cancer treatment theory for 4 years, Marcus explained. Published 3 papers on enzyme pathways before medical school. 2 more during her first year. Then, nothing. What happened? Her mother got sick. Ovarian cancer. Zara took a semester off to care for her, lost her research position, couldn't get back in when she returned. No lab access, no faculty sponsor. But look at this. Marcus pulled up a medical journal on his laptop. 6 months after her mother died, she submitted a paper to the Journal of Clinical Oncology. Revolutionary approach to enzyme inhibitor therapy. Peer review called it brilliant but requires institutional backing for proper testing. Was it published? Rejected. Not because the science was wrong, but because she submitted it as an independent researcher. No university affiliation, no lab credentials. Just Zara Thompson, medical student. Alexander slammed his fist on the table. So they buried breakthrough research because she didn't have the right letterhead? Gets worse. 3 months later, a team at Johns Hopkins published similar research. Different approach, less elegant, but they had the backing. Got full funding, clinical trials, media attention. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Zara's research was brilliant enough to save lives, but the system demanded she have permission to be brilliant. There's one more thing, Marcus said hesitantly. About her son's school situation. Alexander braced himself. Malik tested into the gifted program, but PS 118 doesn't have advanced resources. Kids reading at college level, doing calculus for fun. Teacher says he asks questions that stump her daily. But the good schools require residency in different districts or tuition Zara can't afford. Another trap. Brilliant child, brilliant mother, both constrained by systems designed to keep them exactly where they were. That night, Alexander couldn't focus on emails or conference calls. Instead, he researched every aspect of Zara's life with the obsession that had built his empire. What he found made him question everything he thought he knew about merit and opportunity. Zara hadn't just overcome obstacles, she'd been systematically excluded from every opportunity despite being more qualified than people who sailed through. Fired for being right. Rejected for lacking credentials she'd never been allowed to earn. Trapped in poverty despite possessing intelligence that could revolutionize medicine. Meanwhile, his research team, all with prestigious degrees and family connections, had been failing for months to solve problems she'd cracked in a supply closet. The irony tasted like acid. He'd built a fortune by betting on innovation, but the most innovative person in his building was invisible to him. Would you help someone whose brilliance threatens everything you thought you knew about success? At 3 a.m., Alexander made a decision that would change both their lives forever. But first, he needed to understand one more thing: what did Zara Thompson actually want? Because what he was about to offer would either liberate her, or destroy the independence she'd fought so hard to maintain. Subscribe now. Tomorrow's revelation about what she's really been hiding will leave you speechless. Drop a comment. Have you ever had your qualifications questioned just because you didn't fit someone's expectations? The truth about systematic exclusion might be closer to home than you think. Zara knew something had changed the moment she stepped off the elevator. Alexander Cross stood in the hallway at 11 p.m., still wearing his $1,000 suit but with sleeves rolled up and tie loosened. Waiting for her. The same man who'd never acknowledged her existence was now studying her face like she held secrets to the universe. Which, apparently, she did. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Zara's grip tightened on her cleaning cart. "If this is about the supply closet, I already explained. It's not about the closet." Alexander's voice carried a weight that made her stomach clench. "It's about Northwestern Memorial. About your research. About Johns Hopkins stealing your work." The world tilted sideways. How could he possibly know about Northwestern? About the paper rejection? About any of it? "I don't know what you think you." "Fourth in your class at University of Chicago Medical School," Alexander interrupted, pulling out a manila folder thick as a phone book. GPA 3.94. Published researcher. Fired from Northwestern for saving a child's life. Sound familiar? Heat flooded Zara's cheeks, not embarrassment, but fury. "You investigated me. I researched you. There's a difference." "Is there?" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Some rich white man decides I'm interesting, so he digs through my private life without permission. How is that different from every other time someone with power decided what I deserved to know about myself?" Alexander flinched. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable. But instead of backing down, he stepped closer. "Because what I found makes me sick. Not about you, about us. About a system that buried your research while celebrating mediocrity. Spare me the guilt-trip philanthropy." Zara started pushing her cart toward the first office. "I've heard this speech before." "When?" The question stopped her cold. When had she heard it before? The answer tasted bitter: never. No one had ever acknowledged the injustice. They'd just told her to work harder, be grateful, not make waves. But admitting that would give him power she couldn't afford to surrender. "Doesn't matter," she said instead. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. I'm not selling anything." Alexander fell into step beside her as she began cleaning. "I'm offering something." "Right. Let me guess, charity case management. Pat the poor black woman on the head, throw some money at her problems, feel good about yourself." Zara's hands shook as she sprayed disinfectant with more force than necessary. "Thanks, but I've got enough white saviors in my life already." "What if I told you this wasn't about saving you?" Something in his tone made her pause. Alexander was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, not pity, not condescension, but something raw. "What if I told you I need you?" Zara laughed harshly. "Right. The billionaire needs the cleaning lady. That's a new one. My biotech division is failing. The admission came out flat, businesslike. 8 months, $12 million, team of PhD scientists from Harvard, MIT, Stanford. They can't solve what you figured out in a supply closet. He pulled out his phone, showing her emails with subject lines like enzyme project status, critical, and board meeting, biotech division review. We're 6 weeks from the board voting to shut down the entire program. Hundreds of jobs lost. Years of research abandoned. Alexander's jaw tightened. Unless someone can crack enzyme inhibitor pathways that actually work. Despite herself, Zara felt a flicker of interest. What's your team's approach? Direct pathway blocking. Essentially trying to build walls around cancer cells. That's. Zara caught herself before saying, stupid. Inefficient. Cancer adapts too quickly. You need redirection, not blockade. I know. You know. They don't know. Alexander gestured toward the executive floors above them. So I'm making you an offer. Here it comes, Zara thought. The catch. The price. The reason she should have kept her head down and stayed invisible. Full medical school funding, Alexander said. All clinical rotations covered. Research lab access. Graduate housing. Private school for Malik. Zara's cleaning rag stilled against the desk surface. Research partnership with my biotech team. Your name on all patents. Profit sharing on any treatments developed. Full healthcare for your family. And a salary that means you never have to clean another office. The offer hung in the air like a golden rope thrown to someone drowning. Everything she'd dreamed of, everything she'd sacrificed for, wrapped in a neat package and handed to her by a man who'd never noticed her existence until 12 hours ago. Which meant it was definitely a trap. What's the real reason? Zara set down her supplies and faced him fully. Don't insult my intelligence with some story about needing me. Rich men don't hand poor women millions of dollars out of the goodness of their hearts. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. My sister is dying. The words landed like a physical blow. Elena. 34 years old. Ovarian cancer, same type that killed your mother. She's been fighting it for 2 years, and we're running out of options. Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. Traditional treatments aren't working. She needs something revolutionary. Something that targets the specific pathways you've identified. Zara felt her defenses wavering. A dying sister. The same disease that had stolen her mother, leaving her alone with 8-year-old Malik and dreams too expensive to afford. Every oncologist we've consulted says the same thing, current enzyme inhibitors are too crude, too destructive. They're looking for targeted therapy that doesn't exist yet. Alexander met her eyes. Except it does exist. In your notebooks. In research you developed watching your mother die from the same disease. So you're not saving me, Zara said slowly. I'm saving her. We're saving each other. Alexander pulled out a legal document thick as a novel. Partnership agreement. Equal intellectual property rights. Your research, my resources. Your name first on all publications. Zara stared at the contract without reading it. Her mother's face flashed through her mind. Brilliant woman who died because they couldn't afford experimental treatments. How many other mothers were dying right now because breakthrough research sat buried in supply closets? But something nagged at her, some instinct honed by years of disappointment. Why now? She asked. If your sister's been sick for 2 years, why are you just discovering miracle cures from your cleaning staff? Alexander's face flushed red. Because I'm an ass who never looked past surface level. Because I built a company full of people exactly like me and called it merit-based hiring. Because I thought intelligence came with pedigrees and never bothered to notice genius when it was emptying my trash. The honesty hit harder than any sales pitch could have. Your research could save Elena's life, Alexander continued. But it could save thousands of other lives too. Women like your mother who deserve better than dying from treatable diseases. What would you do if someone offered you everything you dreamed of, but you knew accepting it meant admitting the system that excluded you was wrong all along? Zara picked up the contract with trembling hands. Page after page of legal language that could transform her life overnight. Malik could attend the best schools. She could complete medical school without cleaning offices until dawn. Her research could actually reach patients who needed it. But something cold settled in her stomach as she read. This says I'd be working under your biotech division, she said quietly. Reporting to your research director. Well, yes. For organizational purposes. The same research director whose team has been failing for 8 months. Alexander hesitated. Dr. Harrison is very experienced. More experienced than me. At my own research. The question hung between them like a challenge. Zara could see Alexander processing the implications, realizing how the power structure he proposed would work in practice. We could adjust the reporting structure, he said carefully. To what? Making me co-director. Equal authority over research I developed. Zara's voice sharpened. Or would that be too threatening to your experienced team? Silence stretched between them. In that silence, Zara heard everything Alexander wasn't saying. How his board would react to a black cleaning woman suddenly running a research division. How his PhD scientists would respond to taking direction from someone without institutional credentials. How the medical establishment would question every breakthrough that came from her mind instead of their approved channels. This isn't partnership, she said finally. This is a very generous acquisition. That's not, I didn't mean. You meant exactly that. Zara set the contract on the desk between them. You want my research, my ideas, my breakthrough. But you want it packaged in your company structure, filtered through your approved hierarchy, legitimized by your institutional authority. Alexander opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Because she was right, and they both knew it. I spent 4 years watching brilliant ideas get credited to men who couldn't solve them, Zara continued. You're offering me the chance to watch it happen again, just with better compensation. What do you want then? Alexander's voice carried frustration now. What would actual partnership look like? Zara smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. That's the wrong question, Mr. Cross. The question is, are you brave enough to find out? Tomorrow, you'll discover what Zara really wants, and why it terrifies Alexander more than losing his company. Have you ever been offered help that felt more like control? Comment below, when someone offers to save you, who benefits more, you or them, asterisk. Alexander Cross had negotiated billion-dollar deals in boardrooms across 3 continents. He'd faced down hostile takeovers, regulatory investigations, and shareholder revolts. None of that had prepared him for the woman standing in his office at midnight, arms crossed, waiting for him to prove he was more than another privileged man with good intentions and terrible execution. You want to know what real partnership looks like? Zara's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. It starts with truth. Complete truth. Not the sanitized version you tell investors. Alexander loosened his tie, buying time he didn't have. What do you want to know? Everything. Zara settled into the chair across from his desk, not asking permission, just claiming space. Starting with why you really built a biotech division. The question hit deeper than he expected. Alexander poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, then offered the bottle to Zara. She shook her head, watching him with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people's tells for survival. Elena wasn't my first motivation, he admitted. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a genetic marker for Huntington's disease. Zara's expression didn't change, but he caught the slight shift in her posture. Professional interest replacing personal suspicion. Huntington's destroys your brain piece by piece, Alexander continued. Motor control, cognitive function, emotional regulation, everything that makes you who you are just, disappears. My father died from it when I was 12. So you built a biotech company to cure yourself. I built a biotech company to try. Threw hundreds of millions at the smartest people money could buy, convinced that raw funding could solve anything. Alexander took a long pull of bourbon. Turns out intelligence can't be purchased. It has to be recognized. And you never recognized it in your cleaning staff. I never recognized it anywhere that didn't come with the right credentials. The admission tasted like ash. My research team. All brilliant on paper. Harvard PhDs, published researchers, family connections that opened every door. But they think inside boxes I helped build. Zara leaned forward slightly. What kind of boxes? The kind that assume innovation comes from institutions, not individuals. The kind that mistake pedigree for insight. Alexander met her eyes. The kind that would have overlooked you for another 6 months while my sister dies from diseases you might already know how to treat. Might, Zara emphasized. I've got theories, not proven treatments. Your theories are more advanced than anything my team has produced. Alexander pulled up research files on his laptop, turning the screen toward her. Look at this. 18 months of work, millions in funding. They're still trying to build enzyme inhibitors using approaches from the 1990s. Zara scanned the documents, her expression shifting from skepticism to something close to frustration. This is pedestrian. They're not even considering metabolic pathway redirection. Because they don't think like you do. Alexander closed the laptop. They were trained to follow established protocols. You were trained by desperation to find solutions that actually work. So what's the real offer? Zara's voice carried new sharpness. Not the charity package you pitched earlier. What do you actually need? Alexander felt something shift in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced when making his first truly risky business decision decades ago. I need you to take over my biotech division. The words hung in the air like a dare. Zara blinked. Take over. Full authority. Your research priorities, your methodologies, your team structure. I provide funding and resources, you provide direction and innovation. Alexander's pulse quickened as he spoke. No reporting to Dr. Harrison, no institutional hierarchy. You run it. What about your current research team? They work for you now. If they can't adapt to learning from someone without their credentials, they can find other jobs. Zara studied his face with the same intensity she'd applied to molecular structures. You'd fire PhD scientists to make room for a cleaning woman. I'd fire failing scientists to make room for a brilliant researcher. Alexander leaned forward. The difference matters. To you, maybe. To your board. Your investors. The medical establishment that has to validate anything we develop. The question exposed the heart of what terrified him most about this proposal. Not the financial risk, he'd made and lost fortunes before. The risk to everything he'd built his identity around. They'll think I've lost my mind, he admitted. Handing a multi-million-dollar division to someone without traditional qualifications. They'll think you've lost your mind because you're trusting a black woman to lead white men with fancy degrees. The brutal honesty hit like cold water. Alexander wanted to deny it, to claim his concerns were purely professional. But Zara's steady gaze demanded better than comfortable lies. Yes, he said finally. That too. So why do it? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Elena's last chemotherapy session. How she'd looked at him with eyes that had already started saying goodbye. Because I've spent 5 years throwing money at the wrong problems while the right solutions were hiding in supply closets, he said. Because genius shouldn't have to be invisible to survive. And because if you're right about enzyme pathway redirection, you could save my sister's life and thousands of others. And if I'm wrong, then we fail together instead of me failing alone. Something shifted in Zara's expression, walls coming down by inches. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I haven't told you about my research. Alexander waited. It's not just about cancer treatment. The pathway redirection approach, it could work for neurological diseases too. Conditions where cellular metabolism breaks down. She paused. Conditions like Huntington's. The bourbon glass slipped from Alexander's hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. You're saying? I'm saying your genetic marker might not be a death sentence. If we can redirect the metabolic pathways that trigger neurodegeneration, we might be able to prevent symptom onset entirely. Alexander felt his world reshape around this possibility. Not just Elena's life, but his own future. The slow-motion death sentence he'd carried for 5 years might be survivable. How long have you known? I've suspected for months. But I needed lab access to test the theory, and I needed someone willing to fund neurological research alongside cancer treatment. Zara's voice carried new vulnerability. I was going to approach you eventually. When I had more proof, more credibility. Why didn't you? Zara gestured around his opulent office, leather furniture, original artwork, windows overlooking a city most people could only dream of affording. Because men like you don't take meetings with women like me. Because I'm supposed to stay invisible until someone with the right credentials discovers my ideas and makes them respectable. The truth landed like a physical blow. How many breakthrough solutions had he missed because he'd never looked beyond his expected sources? How many brilliant minds had he ignored because they didn't fit his narrow definition of expertise? Have you ever realized the person who could save your life was someone you'd never bothered to see? What do you need? Alexander asked. Not what I'm offering, what do you actually need to prove your theories? 18 months. Full lab access. Research team willing to challenge conventional approaches. Patient data from both cancer and neurological cases. Zara's voice grew stronger with each requirement. And protection from the medical establishment that's going to try to discredit anything that comes from us. Protection. They buried my research once because I didn't have institutional backing. They'll try to bury it again, especially if it's revolutionary enough to disrupt existing treatment protocols. Zara met his eyes. Are you prepared for that fight? Alexander thought about Elena, about his father, about every person who died from diseases that might be treatable with approaches no one had been brave enough to pursue. Yes. Even if it means admitting your $1 million research team was outperformed by someone you paid minimum wage to empty trash cans. Especially then. Zara stood and extended her hand across the desk. Then we have a deal, Mr. Cross. Equal partners. Your resources, my research, shared risk, shared success. Alexander took her hand, feeling calluses earned from years of manual labor, strength built from surviving systems designed to break her. What happens now? Zara smiled, the first genuinely warm expression he'd seen from her. Now we find out if the medical establishment is ready for a revolution. But as they shook hands, neither of them noticed the security camera in the corner of Alexander's office, or the red recording light that had been blinking throughout their entire conversation. By morning, their partnership would face its first attack, and it would come from inside Alexander's own company. Subscribe now before the betrayal hits. What happens next will test everything they just agreed to. Comment below, have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and taking a risk that could change everything? Sometimes the biggest gamble is trusting someone the world told you to ignore. Dr. Harrison's face turned the color of old parchment as he watched the security footage for the third time. You recorded this? Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer from his head of security's guilty expression. Standard protocol for after-hours access to executive floors, Marcus replied. But sir, this footage, it's been accessed by other parties. Alexander's blood chilled. What other parties? Board members received copies an hour ago. Along with additional materials. The conference room door burst open. 3 board members strode in like prosecutors approaching a sentencing, led by Victoria Sterling, Alexander's longest-serving director and biggest skeptic. Alexander. Victoria's voice could have frozen champagne. We need to discuss your midnight meeting with the cleaning staff. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Alexander could see Zara in the research lab below, surrounded by equipment worth more than most people's houses. She was explaining enzyme pathway theory to his research team, sketching molecular structures with the confidence of someone who'd been visualizing them for years. Half the scientists leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. The other half sat with arms crossed, radiating the kind of professional offense that came from being taught by someone they'd never considered their equal. What exactly needs discussing? Alexander kept his voice level. Victoria slid a manila folder across the conference table. Background reports on your new partner. Makes for fascinating reading. Alexander flipped open the folder, stomach sinking with each page. Zara's termination from Northwestern Memorial, highlighted and annotated. Her mother's medical records, somehow obtained. Financial records showing every late rent payment, every maxed-out credit card. Where did you get this? Sources matter less than content, Dr. Harrison interjected. Mr. Cross, you've handed our biotech division to someone with no institutional credentials, no management experience, and a history of workplace insubordination. I've handed it to someone who solved problems your team couldn't crack in 18 months. Alleged solutions, Victoria corrected. Based on theoretical research that hasn't undergone peer review. Alexander felt rage building in his chest. Because she wasn't allowed access to peer review. Because the system. The system exists for good reasons, Dr. Harrison interrupted. Medical research requires rigorous oversight, established protocols, institutional safeguards. You can't just promote the cleaning lady because she reads science journals. I can promote anyone I want. It's my company. Actually, Victoria's smile carried razor edges, it's not. She pulled out another document, corporate bylaws Alexander had signed years ago when Cross Dynamics went public. Board approval required for leadership changes in research divisions. Particularly when those changes involve unvetted personnel in positions requiring security clearance. Alexander scanned the legal language, recognizing the trap he'd walked into. In his enthusiasm to right historical wrongs, he'd forgotten about institutional constraints on his own power. You're calling for a vote. We're calling for sanity. Victoria stood, straightening her designer suit. Dr. Thompson can remain as a research consultant. Supervised by Dr. Harrison's team, proper protocols observed, appropriate oversight maintained. In other words, back to being invisible while other people get credit for her work. In other words, back to following established procedures that protect both the company and the research integrity. Through the window, Alexander watched Zara demonstrate something on a whiteboard. Whatever she was showing made two of the younger scientists sit up straighter, while Dr. Harrison's most senior researcher shook his head dismissively. What if she's right? Alexander asked quietly. What if her approach actually works? Then it will work within proper institutional frameworks, Victoria replied. With appropriate supervision and credit allocation. Meaning you get the patents and she gets a consultation fee. Meaning everyone stays in their appropriate roles. Alexander looked around the conference room at faces he'd known for years. People who'd helped him build Cross Dynamics from a startup into a billion-dollar empire. People who'd never questioned his judgment on acquisitions, expansions, or strategic pivots. But they were questioning this. There's something else, Victoria said, producing another document. Media inquiries. Someone leaked the story to TechCrunch about your Cinderella scientist. The phone's been ringing all morning. Alexander's stomach dropped. What kind of inquiries? Human interest angles. Rags to riches narratives. The kind of attention that turns serious research into feel-good entertainment. Victoria's tone suggested she'd rather discuss sewage treatment. Not exactly the professional image we want associated with life-saving medical research. Marcus cleared his throat. Sir, there's more. Pharmaceutical companies have been calling. They're concerned about potential disruption to established treatment protocols. Concerned? Threatening legal action if we proceed with research that could undermine existing patents. Alexander felt walls closing in from every direction. The medical establishment protecting its turf, his own board protecting their investments, pharmaceutical companies protecting their profits, all aligned against the partnership he'd formed 12 hours ago. What do they want? Buy out whatever research Miss Thompson has developed, Victoria said. Generous compensation for her contributions, proper research team takes over development, everyone stays in appropriate roles. How generous? 200,000. Plus a consulting contract. Alexander thought about the breakthroughs Zara had described, the lives that could be saved, the profits that could be generated. 200,000 was insultingly small, pocket change compared to what her research was worth. And if I refuse? Victoria's smile turned predatory. Board vote of no confidence. Securities Commission investigation into your decision-making competency. Media scrutiny of your relationship with an employee. The threat landed like a physical blow. They were questioning not just his business judgment, but his mental fitness to run the company he'd built. Through the window, he watched Zara pointing at something on a computer screen while one of the younger scientists nodded enthusiastically. She looked completely at home in the lab, like she'd been waiting her whole life for access to proper equipment. She belongs there, Alexander said quietly. She belongs where her qualifications put her, Dr. Harrison replied. Which is not leading a research division worth hundreds of millions. Her qualifications include solving problems your PhD team couldn't crack. Alleged solutions. Stop calling them alleged. Alexander slammed his hand on the conference table. I've seen her work. It's brilliant. More innovative than anything we've produced in 2 years. Innovation without institutional backing is just expensive trial and error, Victoria said. The board won't approve gambling company resources on unproven theories from unvetted personnel. Alexander looked around the room at faces that had hardened into professional skepticism. People who trusted his judgment on billion-dollar acquisitions were drawing lines at trusting a brilliant woman without the right credentials. What if I stake my own position on it? Silence stretched like a held breath. Meaning what, exactly? Victoria asked. Meaning if Zara's research doesn't produce significant breakthrough results in 6 months, I'll step down as CEO. The proposal hung in the air like a live grenade. Alexander, Victoria's voice carried warning, you're talking about risking everything you've built for someone you met yesterday. I'm talking about betting on breakthrough science instead of institutional politics. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. And if her theories are wrong? If 18 months of work produces nothing but expensive failures? Alexander thought about Elena, about his own genetic time bomb, about every person who died from diseases that might be treatable with approaches no one had been brave enough to pursue. Then I'll have failed pursuing solutions instead of succeeding at maintaining problems. Through the window, Zara looked up at the conference room as if sensing the weight of discussion above her. Their eyes met across the glass, and Alexander saw something in her expression that made his decision final. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was ready to fight. 6 months, he said. Full authority for Dr. Thompson to run biotech research as she sees fit. If she doesn't produce breakthrough results, I step down voluntarily. And if she does produce results? Alexander smiled grimly. Then we'll have proven that intelligence comes from insight, not institutions. Victoria gathered her papers with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to winning boardroom battles. The board will vote on your proposal tomorrow at 9 a.m. I suggest you spend tonight considering whether gambling your life's work on someone else's theories is really the legacy you want to leave. As the board members filed out, Alexander remained at the window watching Zara work. She'd drawn molecular structures across 3 whiteboards, creating what looked like a roadmap to medical revolution. But tomorrow's vote would determine whether that roadmap led anywhere beyond the unemployment line. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, *, your cleaning lady's research is more dangerous than you know. Some discoveries are better left buried, *. Someone was already moving to destroy their partnership before it could threaten established interests. The real fight was just beginning. Subscribe now. Tomorrow's board vote will determine whether genius gets a chance to save lives, or whether the system wins again. Comment below, have you ever had to choose between what's safe and what's right? Sometimes the biggest risk is trusting someone the world told you couldn't possibly know better than the experts, *. The board vote wasn't even close. 7-2 against Alexander's proposal, with 1 abstention. Victoria Sterling's satisfied smile could have powered the building's lighting system. The board has spoken, she announced at 9:47 a.m. Dr. Thompson will remain as a research consultant under Dr. Harrison's supervision. Mr. Cross retains CEO authority, but biotech division leadership returns to established protocols. Alexander felt his partnership with Zara crumble before it had even begun. But Zara's reaction surprised everyone in the boardroom. She laughed. Not bitter or defeated, genuinely amused, like someone who'd watched a predictable movie reach its obvious conclusion. You know what's funny, she said, addressing the board members who'd spent an hour discussing her qualifications without once asking for her input. You just proved my point about institutional thinking. Victoria's smile faltered. Excuse me? You're so focused on protecting existing structures that you can't see the real threat. Zara stood, gathering the research notes she'd brought as evidence. While you were debating my credentials, Meridian Pharmaceuticals filed patent applications on enzyme pathway research. The room went dead silent. Patent applications based on what research? Dr. Harrison's voice carried new tension. Research identical to mine. Down to the molecular diagrams. Zara pulled out her phone, showing screenshots of patent filings dated 3 days ago. Someone leaked my work to Meridian's development team. Alexander's blood turned to ice. That's impossible. Your research hasn't been shared outside this building. Hasn't it? Zara's gaze swept the boardroom. Funny how Meridian knew exactly which enzyme pathways I was targeting. Almost like they had access to detailed notes from someone who'd reviewed my theories. The implications hit the room like a grenade blast. Someone in Cross Dynamics had sold Zara's research to their biggest pharmaceutical competitor. Victoria Sterling's face had gone pale. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you that while you spent this morning debating whether I'm qualified to lead research, someone who attended yesterday's lab presentation has already monetized my work for our competition. Alexander felt rage and betrayal warring in his chest. Who had access to your research notes? Everyone in this room. Plus the 5 senior researchers who attended yesterday's presentation. Zara's voice carried deadly calm. One of them decided my ideas were worth stealing but not worth crediting. Dr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's a serious accusation. It's a provable fact. Zara opened her laptop, projecting patent documents onto the conference room screen. Meridian's application includes molecular structures I drew yesterday. Structures I've never published, never shared outside this building. The projected images showed enzyme diagrams identical to what Zara had sketched on the lab whiteboards less than 24 hours earlier. This is industrial espionage, Marcus said quietly. This is Tuesday morning in pharmaceutical research, Zara corrected. Ideas get stolen from people without institutional protection every single day. Alexander stared at the patent applications, feeling everything he thought he understood about his company crumble. Someone on his team, someone he trusted, had sold out the most innovative research they'd seen in years. What's Meridian's timeline for development? He asked. 18 months to clinical trials. 2 years to market. Zara's smile carried no warmth. They'll have FDA-approved treatments based on my research while you're still debating whether I'm qualified to contribute to my own discoveries. We can fight the patents, Victoria said. Prior art, intellectual property theft. With what evidence? My notebook drawings from a supply closet? Zara shook her head. Meridian has institutional backing, research documentation, established patent attorneys. What do I have? The word of a cleaning woman against a pharmaceutical company worth $12 billion. The stark reality landed like a physical blow. The system that had excluded Zara from recognition now made it impossible for her to reclaim stolen work. There has to be something we can do, Alexander said. There is. Zara closed her laptop with decisive finality. We beat them to market. Silence stretched across the boardroom. Meridian stole my published theories, she continued. But they don't have my unpublished breakthrough. Alexander leaned forward. What breakthrough? The neurological applications you and I discussed last night. Huntington's, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Meridian focused on cancer applications because that's what they saw in yesterday's presentation. They don't know about metabolic pathway redirection for neurological diseases. Hope flickered in Alexander's chest. Can we develop it faster than they can develop cancer treatments? Not with institutional approval processes and board oversight. Zara's gaze swept the room. But maybe with a different approach. What kind of approach? Victoria asked suspiciously. The kind that doesn't wait for permission from people who've already proven they can't recognize breakthrough science when it's presented to them. Alexander understood immediately. Independent development. Exactly. We take the research outside institutional frameworks, develop it privately, then license it back to Cross Dynamics when we have proven results. Dr. Harrison sputtered. That's completely irregular. So was stealing research to sell to competitors, Zara shot back. Seems like irregular situations call for irregular solutions. Victoria leaned forward, corporate instincts sharpening. What would independent development require? Private funding. Lab access outside Cross Dynamics. Research team willing to work without institutional backing. Zara looked directly at Alexander. And partners willing to risk everything on unproven science. Alexander felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The board had just voted against trusting Zara with company resources. Now she was asking him to trust her with his personal fortune. How much funding? $5 million for 18 months. Lab equipment, research staff, clinical trial preparation. And if it fails? Zara's smile carried steel edges. Then Meridian gets rich off my stolen work while breakthrough treatments for neurological diseases stay buried for another decade. Alexander thought about Elena, fighting cancer with treatments that weren't working. About his own genetic time bomb. About every person suffering from diseases that might be treatable with approaches no one had been brave enough to pursue. What do you need from me? Partnership. Real partnership this time. No corporate hierarchies, no institutional oversight. Just two people betting everything on breakthrough science. Victoria Sterling stood abruptly. Alexander, you cannot seriously be considering. I'm considering saving my sister's life and thousands of others. Alexander's voice carried finality. The board made their decision about institutional approaches. Now I'm making mine about personal ones. This is financial suicide. This is the only option that doesn't reward the people who stole Zara's work. Alexander turned to face Zara directly. Equal partners. Shared risk, shared ownership, shared success or failure. Shared everything, she agreed. Including the consequences when pharmaceutical companies realize we're threatening billion-dollar treatment protocols. What consequences? Zara's expression darkened. The kind that made someone leak my research to Meridian in the first place. The kind that sent anonymous threats to your phone last night. The kind that don't stop at corporate sabotage. Alexander's phone buzzed with a new text. Your partner's son attends PS 118 in Bronzeville. Nice school. Shame if something happened to their funding. The message felt like ice water in his veins. They're threatening Malik, he whispered. They're threatening everything that matters to us, Zara corrected. Because breakthrough science threatens everything that matters to them. Alexander looked around the boardroom at faces he'd trusted for years. One of them had already betrayed everything he thought he knew about loyalty and integrity. We do this outside company structure, he decided. Private partnership, independent development, protection for everyone who matters to us. Including protection from whoever's been feeding information to our competitors. Alexander's gaze swept the boardroom, wondering which familiar face had sold them out. Especially from them. As the board members filed out, Alexander remained with Zara, staring at patent documents that proved genius could be stolen but not stopped. Are you ready for this fight? She asked. Alexander thought about Elena's declining health, about anonymous threats against an 8-year-old boy, about research that could save lives being buried to protect profits. I'm ready to win it. But neither of them noticed Dr. Harrison lingering in the hallway outside, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in quiet tones to someone who clearly wasn't expecting good news about their efforts to contain revolutionary research. The betrayal was closer than they knew, and the real danger was just beginning. Tomorrow, you'll discover who's been selling their secrets, and why the pharmaceutical industry is willing to destroy lives to protect profits. Comment below, when someone steals your ideas, do you give up or do you get creative? Sometimes the only way to beat a rigged system is to stop playing by their rules. 3 months later, Alexander Cross stood in an abandoned warehouse in South Chicago, watching Zara Thompson change the world. The makeshift laboratory hummed with equipment worth millions, spectrometers, electron microscopes, cell culture systems that Alexander had purchased with his personal fortune. But the real magic happened at the whiteboard where Zara drew molecular structures that looked like blueprints for miracles. Show me the neurological pathway results again, said Dr. Kenji Nakamura, the brilliant researcher they'd poached from Johns Hopkins when he'd grown tired of institutional politics stifling innovation. Zara pulled up data on the massive screen they'd mounted on the warehouse's brick wall. Huntington's disease markers in cell cultures. Control group shows progressive neurodegeneration over 6 weeks. The left side of the screen displayed dying brain cells, metabolic pathways collapsing in real-time cellular death. Treatment group using metabolic pathway redirection. The right side showed brain cells not just surviving, but thriving. Cellular repair mechanisms activated, neurodegeneration halted, healthy function restored. Jesus, whispered Dr. Nina Okafor, the young oncologist who joined them after watching her own research get buried by pharmaceutical politics. It actually works. Alexander felt his world shift on its axis. The genetic death sentence he'd carried for 5 years, the slow-motion destruction of his father's disease, might not be inevitable after all. What about the cancer applications? Asked Marcus, who'd left Cross Dynamics to manage operations for their independent partnership. Zara switched screens, showing tumor cell cultures that had been treated with her enzyme pathway redirection approach. Pancreatic cancer cells. Stage 4 aggressive growth pattern. The before images showed cancer spreading like wildfire through healthy tissue. After treatment. The after images showed something that should have been impossible, tumor cells essentially committing suicide while healthy cells remained untouched. How long until we can move to human trials? Alexander asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be complicated. That's where we hit our first real obstacle, Zara said. FDA approval requires institutional sponsorship. Clinical trials need university-hospital partnerships. Neither of which we can access as an independent research group. Dr. Nakamura nodded grimly. Medical establishment doesn't recognize research that doesn't come through approved channels, no matter how revolutionary. So we're back where we started, Nina said. Breakthrough science trapped by institutional gatekeeping. Alexander felt familiar frustration rising, but Zara's expression carried something different, not defeat, but determination. Not necessarily, she said. There's another approach. What approach? Zara walked to a second whiteboard covered in diagrams that weren't molecular structures but organizational charts. We've been thinking about this backwards. Instead of begging institutions to recognize our research, we create our own pathway to patients. Alexander studied the charts, recognizing the same innovative thinking that had revolutionized her scientific approach. Explain. International clinical trials. Medical tourism partnerships. Countries with less restrictive approval processes but equally rigorous safety standards. Zara traced connections between research centers, hospitals, and regulatory agencies. Germany, Switzerland, South Korea, all have accelerated approval pathways for breakthrough treatments. You're talking about bypassing the entire American medical establishment, Marcus said. I'm talking about serving patients who can't wait for American medical politics to catch up with American medical science. Dr. Nakamura was studying the organizational charts with growing excitement. Medical centers in Munich, Zurich, Seoul, they've been frustrated with FDA bottlenecks for years. If we can prove safety and efficacy through their systems, then we bring proven treatments back to the US, Alexander finished. Not as experimental research, but as established medical procedures with international validation. Exactly. Zara turned back to face the group. But there's something else we need to address first. She pulled up a new document on the screen, legal papers that made Alexander's chest tighten. Meridian Pharmaceuticals filed suit against Cross Dynamics yesterday. Patent infringement, intellectual property theft, corporate espionage. Based on what evidence? Alexander asked, though he suspected he already knew. Based on research notes provided by someone with detailed access to our current work. Zara's voice carried steel edges. Someone who's been documenting our progress and sharing it with their legal team. Alexander felt rage building in his chest. 3 months of revolutionary breakthroughs, and someone was still feeding information to their competitors. Do we know who? We're about to find out. Zara walked to the warehouse's main entrance and opened it. Dr. Harrison stepped inside, looking around the converted laboratory space with barely concealed disdain. Impressive setup, he said. Though I'm surprised Alexander's personal fortune stretched to cover equipment this sophisticated. It didn't, Zara replied calmly. We had additional investors. What investors? The warehouse's back entrance opened, and Elena Cross walked in. Alexander's sister looked pale but determined, moving with the careful energy of someone fighting cancer who'd found new reasons for hope. Elena? Alexander's voice cracked. What are you doing here? Funding the research that's going to save my life. Elena's smile carried fierce determination. Turns out wealthy cancer patients are very motivated investors when you can prove your treatments actually work. Dr. Harrison's face went ashen. You're saying? We're saying we have 12 major investors, all with conditions that could benefit from breakthrough treatments, Zara explained. People willing to fund research the medical establishment won't recognize and pharmaceutical companies want to suppress. People like Senator Morrison, whose wife has Alzheimer's, Elena added. Like tech CEO Jennifer Liu, whose daughter has early-onset Parkinson's. Like Supreme Court Justice Williams, whose son has Huntington's disease. Alexander felt pieces clicking together with devastating clarity. You've been building a coalition. We've been building power, Zara corrected. The kind that doesn't depend on institutional approval or pharmaceutical profits. Dr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. This is highly irregular. So is selling research notes to Meridian Pharmaceuticals, Zara interrupted. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Dr. Harrison's face flushed red, then drained to gray. I don't know what you're talking about. We know about the payments, Harrison. Alexander's voice carried quiet fury. $50,000 deposited in your consulting account each time you provided research updates to Meridian's development team. Dr. Harrison's shoulders sagged in defeat. You don't understand the pressure. Meridian threatened to destroy my career, blacklist me from every major research institution. So you decided to destroy ours instead. I hoped, if Meridian developed the treatments first, patients would still benefit. Does it really matter who gets credit as long as people are saved? Zara stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of years fighting for recognition. It matters because credit determines control. It matters because whoever controls breakthrough treatments controls who gets access to them. It matters because when you steal research from excluded voices, you ensure those voices stay excluded. She gestured around the warehouse laboratory, at equipment purchased with personal fortunes and coalition funding. Meridian would have patented my research, charged premium prices, restricted access to wealthy patients who could afford it. Just like every other pharmaceutical breakthrough that prioritizes profits over patients. What's your alternative? Open source medical research. Zara walked back to the whiteboard covered in molecular structures. Patent-free treatments. International clinical trials funded by patient coalitions rather than pharmaceutical profits. Dr. Harrison stared at her like she'd suggested abolishing modern medicine. That's impossible. Medical research requires institutional backing, regulatory oversight. Medical research requires intelligence, resources, and determination, Alexander corrected. Everything else is just gatekeeping designed to control who gets to save lives. Elena stepped forward, pulling out legal documents from her briefcase. Which is why we're making a formal announcement tomorrow, she said. The Cross Foundation for Open Medical Research. 12 founding investors, international research partnerships, and a commitment to making breakthrough treatments accessible regardless of patients' ability to pay. "You're declaring war on the entire pharmaceutical industry," Dr. Harrison whispered. "We're declaring independence from systems that prioritize profits over patients," Zara replied. "There's a difference." Alexander looked around the warehouse laboratory, at equipment that represented his entire personal fortune, at researchers who'd abandoned prestigious positions to pursue breakthrough science, at his sister who'd invested her trust fund in treatments that might save her life. "Have you ever realized that the only way to change a broken system is to build a better one?" "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we prove that medical innovation doesn't require institutional permission," Zara said. "We take our treatments to international partners, conduct clinical trials outside American gatekeeping systems, and bring back proven therapies that pharmaceutical companies can't patent or control. And when they try to stop us..." Elena's smile carried the fierce determination of someone fighting for her life. "They'll discover that coalition power is stronger than corporate power. That patients with resources and political connections can build systems that serve people instead of profits." Dr. Harrison backed toward the warehouse entrance, looking like someone who'd realized they'd chosen the wrong side of history. "This will never work," he said. "The medical establishment won't recognize treatments developed outside approved channels. The medical establishment will recognize treatments that save lives," Zara replied. "Especially when those treatments are backed by Supreme Court justices, senators, and tech CEOs whose family members are alive because of breakthrough research." As Dr. Harrison fled, Alexander felt something shift in his understanding of power and possibility. "What's our timeline?" 6 months to international clinical trials. 18 months to proven treatments. 2 years to revolutionary change in how medical research serves patients instead of profits. Zara turned back to her molecular diagrams, but her expression carried new confidence, not just in her science, but in her ability to change systems that had tried to suppress her voice. "Ready to change the world?" Alexander asked. "Ready to save it," she replied. But as they returned to work, none of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the telephoto lens capturing every face that entered and left their warehouse laboratory. Some revolutions face resistance that goes far beyond corporate boardrooms and pharmaceutical patents. Some discoveries threaten interests powerful enough to play by different rules entirely. The real fight was just beginning, but this time, they weren't fighting alone. 5 years later, Dr. Zara Thompson stood in the same auditorium where she'd once been excluded from presenting her research. But now she was the keynote speaker at the International Conference on Revolutionary Medical Treatments, introducing breakthrough therapies that had saved thousands of lives worldwide. In the front row sat Alexander Cross, healthy and vibrant at 47, his Huntington's disease markers completely eliminated by treatments his own foundation had developed. Beside him, Elena Cross, cancer-free for 3 years and running the foundation's patient advocacy programs. And in the back of the auditorium, 8-year-old Malik Thompson, now 13 and already accepted into MIT's early admission program, watched his mother change the world by refusing to let the world change her. The revolution they'd started in a warehouse laboratory had grown into a movement that proved breakthrough science doesn't require permission from broken systems. It just requires the courage to build better ones. What would you do if you had the power to change systems that excluded you? Sometimes the biggest revolution starts with one person refusing to stay invisible. Subscribe to follow more stories of people who changed the world by refusing to accept the world as it was.